Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about MTHFR and everything there is to know about MTHFR. There's a lot of confusion around it, there's a lot of misinformation. I want to go through some things that you should know about MTHFR and, really go through what you can do, what you should or should not do about it. So, the first thing that you can do, and for anyone who's looking at a computer, I'm going to share my screen. If not, I'll try to just describe it in a way that you can understand it by listening. But the first thing you do is on self decode. When you get your genetic results, you could just type in MTHFR and it finds the report. Once you're at your report, it tells you the conclusion, likely lower MTHFR activity. That is my result. It's looking at two variants, and these have lower MTHFR activity. It tells me which variants it's looking at. And then it gives some information, some basic information. If you want to look at some more detailed information, we have a long post going through all the details, much more detailed information here. So, for people who really want to go into the details about what MTHFR means, I highly recommend it and this specific genetic variants. I'm going to go through just some of the summary. So, you could see here MTHFR is an enzyme. And what it does is it uses a certain type of folate in order to create this methylfolate. So you have many different kinds of circulating folate in the body. When you check serum folate, it could be many different kinds of folate actually. There's dihydrofolate, there's 5,10 methylene tetrahydrofolate, 5 methylfolate, and you could see that there's dietary folate turns into dihydrofolate, tetrahydrofolate, 5,10 methylene tetrahydrofolate, and then 5-methylfolate. So 5-methylfolate is the most active form of folate, and there's not a lot of research on the topic, but that the very little research that is done seems to show that having high levels of synthetic folate. So when you get synthetic folate, it's different than dietary folate. So dietary folate, there's many kinds of dietary folate, and the dietary folate is generally way more bioavailable and it's ready to work in the body. Now some of it still needs to go through sometimes some processing. It depends, I guess, where you're getting it from, but it's generally much more bioavailable. Whereas all the grains now are fortified with synthetic folate, which is not a problem if MTHFR is working well. There have been some studies that show that having high levels of synthetic folate in the blood seem to be problems. It could maybe increase the risk of cancer. So, you know, it seems like there's negatives to having higher levels of the synthetic folate, whereas that doesn't seem to be the case with the methylfolate. And again, there's not a lot of research on the topic, so it's nothing is very conclusive. It's just what the latest information shows. Now, the MTHFR is used to convert the synthetic folate into this more active folate that the body can use. And now there is some, I think sometimes people can over focus on just MTHFR, but MTHFR is a very important enzyme in creating the methylfolate and in general the methylation process. So while it is important, some people could think it's the be all end all. It is still a single variant or a single gene. Well, there's two variants in this case. So there's one main variant and then there's one that's a little less important. I have two of the bad alleles, you can say, for the main variant. That's the RS 180 1133. And you could just see this pathway here. So if you're looking, so it goes from dietary folate to dihydrofolate, tetrahydrofolate, 5,10 methylene tetrahydrofolate, and then it uses that MTHFR enzyme to create this 5-methylene folate. And then in combination with B12, it then converts homocysteine to methionine, which is then converted into S-adenosylmethionine, and that is where the DNA methylation occurs. So let's talk about some things that you should be doing if you have this genetic variant. Now, we have the recommendations in Self Decode, so I highly recommend people go there and look at the recommendations. And we start off with dietary folate. That is number one. And so dietary folate is going to be important, like I said, because it has not only the 5-methylfolate, but other kinds of folates. And it's probably good to get some kind of diversity there when you get the natural form. So the the first approach is dietary folate, and you could get that in beef liver, spinach, peas, black eyed peas, asparagus, citrus fruits. We have folate, so that would include folate supplements mainly. And for that, you can get the methylfolate supplements. So, again, most studies are actually done on the synthetic folate. So, if you just feed your system more folic acid, synthetic folic acid, it still should technically help, but you're just not converting it as much and it builds up in the blood. So, there's some negatives there. But technically, a lot of the studies were done on the synthetic folate, and the synthetic folate still does help with the MTHFR. The problem is that it's just not as good as taking the 5-methylfolate, because that folate is already much more bioavailable, and so that it bypasses the MTHFR enzyme, and so it doesn't need to work as well. And so people with lower MTHFR activity may have 16% lower folate levels, and they tend to have increased homocysteine. And again, supplementation with folate may lower homocysteine levels, and there's some benefits with that. Now, again, the methylfolate is a better solution. There's not a lot of concrete proof, but it still seems it's pretty clear that, in my opinion, that would be significantly better. Next up, we have riboflavin. So there's not a lot of clinical trials done on MTHFR, but riboflavin is one. So people were getting a low amount of riboflavin, and it helped normalize their homocysteine. So, for example, supplementing with riboflavin may decrease blood pressure more in people with reduced MTHFR activity. So the vitamin helps MTHFR work properly. And basically, riboflavin is a cofactor for MTHFR. So a lot of these enzymes, you have a cofactor, and for MTHFR, that's riboflavin. So it would make sense that if you give more of the cofactor, the enzyme will work better. And that's kind of generally how it works. When you saturate the system with a cofactor, then the enzyme can work better. So either supplemental riboflavin, dietary riboflavin, both of them are going to do well. You don't need that much riboflavin in order to make MTHFR work better. You only need, so you don't have to supplement, but I personally do supplement because I tend to need more B vitamins. And even though I don't notice any significant difference with riboflavin in the short term, I do notice with some other B vitamins, and you don't want to have an imbalance with the B vitamins because they interact with each other. So I do take supplemental riboflavin. Now, methylfolate, I want to be clear about something. If you have this MTHFR enzyme, these genetic variation and this poor genetic variation that doesn't convert the synthetic folate as well, I want to be clear that you should also check your homocysteine. So it's not that clear that if you have this MTHFR enzyme that there's any negative consequences if your homocysteine is at a good level. So I want to be clear about that. Again, you could still assume that there could be problems, but this is already in the theory realm, not in the scientific facts realm. And sometimes I like to be in the theory realm, so I don't mind that. I do think that it's probably better to have more methylfolate. So what I do actually, one of the things that I actually look at is optimal mortality, like what is the lowest risk of disease and mortality with what level of folate, and we give that level in self-decode. So, for example, you could see that level is between 11 and 22.6. And it could even be a technically higher, but that's kind of the range that you want it in. And especially if it's in the methylfolate, then that is good. So you could see, if you're looking at the screen, you could see that at one point mine went down to 5.6. And that's simply because I was fighting an infection. So your body uses folate basically when you fight an infection. And you could see that that was the case. It went down from 23.4 to 5.6. But then since then, it's been in the normal range, and it kind of goes a little lower. Again, it kind of follows how much methylfolate I'm taking. I only take methylfolate in terms of supplements, and mine tend to be around 20 to 22 if I'm taking about 2.5 milligrams a day. So it's the higher end of the optimal range, and that gives me some room to go down if I'm fighting an infection. So that's kind of what I do. I might change it up. Again, there's diminishing returns if you really only need 400 micrograms per the RDA, but if you're getting some other B vitamins, you could maybe, you might need some more, so maybe up to a milligram. I like to go a little over 2 milligrams, 2.5 milligrams. And in part, that also has to do with my homocysteine, by the way. So you want to look at your serum folate and you want to look at your homocysteine. Your serum folate might not be that relevant if you're taking synthetic folate. So your serum folate would not be as relevant if you're taking synthetic folate, but you could see your homocysteine. Homocysteine, by the way, is the single best marker for how good you're methylating. And for MTHFR, the main issue is you want to make sure that you're methylating properly. And so I mean, it's not only methylation because folate does some other things as well in the body. So you want to make sure that your serum folate levels are good and that you're also methylating well. And so for serum folate, you could do a simple test, get your blood checked for serum folate. For methylation, you could check for homocysteine. Now, we also have a methylation report that is quite good. It's the best report on the market by far. In this case, we're looking at 30 variants that have some proven connection or some evidence of a connection between some kind of methylation pathway. And we're looking at many genes, not only MTHFR, so that includes BHMT, SHMT1, COMT, MTR, MTRR, and MTHFD1, PEMT. There's a lot of names there, but essentially these are a lot of enzymes that are relevant in the methylation pathway. And in my case, you could see that I am lower in methylation. So there's a lot of genes in the methylation pathway, and you want to look at something that is looking at all of these genes. But I will get into general methylation in a different podcast. Just wanted you to be aware of that. So the recommended supplement is the L-methylfolate, and there's now a lot of supplements that sell that variety. You can get it within a B complex. I like to get a little more that's usually found in B complex. I usually like to get 1 milligram. That's what I would recommend. I personally get 2 milligrams, but again, I'm still experimenting, and I'm experimenting based on what my serum folate level is and homocysteine. So since my homocysteine still has some room to improve, I was taking more, but now I'm doing other things to improve my methylation status. Again, different podcast. Next up, you want to avoid high dose niacin. So niacin does suck up methylation. That's, by the way, another reason why my homocysteine may have gone up a little bit. I was taking higher doses of niacin. And so 100, 200 milligrams a day of niacin is fine. You just have to make sure you're getting enough. I actually recommend it, but you got to make sure you're getting enough of those methyl groups. So yeah. And so you should be careful if you have that MTHFR enzyme and you're consuming over 200 milligrams of niacin a day. Next up, zinc. You want to make sure you have optimal zinc status. So, zinc is important for folate absorption and healthy methylation. If you're deficient in zinc, your gut enzymes can't break down folate into form you can absorb. Zinc also helps carry folate. Zinc also helps folate carry out its role in the body. Next up, avoid cigarette smoke. I don't think I need to convince anybody here, but just so people know, cigarettes deplete folate directly, so it could worsen having lower MTHFR. Alcohol depletes folate again, so if your folate pathway is not very good with MTHFR, you need to make sure you're getting enough folate, and things like alcohol, smoking, these will place a burden on your folate. Now, there are certain methylation things that you could do to increase supplements to increase methylation. And again, this is more getting into the methylation realm, but it could be relevant obviously for people with the MTHFR. So for so good there's a few good supplements for methylation. Betaine is one of them, and that's something that we'll get into more in the methylation. Now, if you're supplementing with folate, you also have to supplement with B12. So it's the combination of folate and B12, especially the methylcobalamin, that is going to take the I'll show you so it's the MTR enzyme. So vitamin B12 is a cofactor for MTR, and MTR is needed to convert homocysteine to methionine. So you need the methylfolate plus the methyl B12 in order to uh, convert the homocysteine into the methionine and then the methionine into SAMe. Now, vitamin B6 is kind of an indirect recommendation because vitamin B6 basically reduces homocysteine itself. So that can benefit, meaning a lot of the negatives from having MTHFR have to do with homocysteine. So having a negative variant of the MTHFR, the one, variant that makes it not work as well. So that has to do with homocysteine. So the B6 can indirectly help with that. Next up is choline. So choline basically is a nutrient that converts into trimethylglycine or betaine, and that helps essentially create methionine from homocysteine. So it helps with the creation of methionine, and methionine helps with methylation by getting converted into SAMe, S-adenosyl methionine. Now, for people who do not have any sensitivities, legumes can be a rich source of folate. So that could be beneficial, but there are a lot of people with food sensitivities, especially people with MTHFR. So it's something you want to be careful about. Avocados are also a rich source of folate. So also, if you want some dietary approaches, avocado, broccoli, leafy greens are also pretty good. So leafy green vegetables come up here as well. And yeah, so in terms of, vegetarian diets get more because, broccoli, leafy green vegetables, avocados, legumes, which are beans essentially. And then you have avoiding exposure to heavy metals. So heavy metals can interfere with the activity of enzymes involved in methylation. And there's a lot of people there's more people who have these negative MTHFR variant who react negatively to heavy metals. I personally do not react more negatively to heavy metals that if I don't notice an effect, but some metals like mercury and arsenic can be methylated by the body as a way to facilitate their excretion. And so it places a higher burden on the methylation pathways. So something to think about. Now, sunlight exposure is also something that people should be mindful of. You always want to balance with certain things like exercise, sunlight, very, very beneficial, but you don't want too much of any of these things. And sunlight in particular can actually cause folate depletion. So sunlight basically gets rid of the folate, and it reduces folate, and so you'll need more if you're getting more sunlight. So that's what you need to know for the MTHFR. If you are red here or you have lower MTHFR activity, the main thing you need to know is you can get more from your diet from plants generally. So getting some vegetables, you could supplement, and I would recommend looking at the methylation report to see if you're low in methylation as a whole, because it could be that your methylation is fine and MTHFR is only a problem. But essentially, it's important to know what are the things that could be problematic. You should check your zinc status, your B vitamins, make sure you're getting enough riboflavin for that enzyme. You can take the you could take the L-methylfolate supplement, and that could be good as well. So if we look at the list again, the things that I try to do or that I do, so I don't like to always think about what I'm eating, if I'm getting enough of nutrients. So I just take a supplement with riboflavin and methylfolate and other B vitamins as well, by the way, B12, B6. So I get all of those B vitamins there. I measure my B vitamin levels to make sure they're in the optimal range. And I also make sure my zinc is in the optimal range. Um, I don't I try to limit alcohol, so that can also cause issues with folate. And then in general, I think if you take care of those things, then the other things I don't think you need to really worry about much. Those are the main things that you should be concerned about. And then not because of MTHFR, but because of methylation as a whole, because I'm low on methylation according to my genetics. And also according to my lab tests, when you look at homocysteine, I take other methyl groups, and that I'm going to say more for in the methylation podcast. So there's many companies that check for MTHFR. It's one of the most important SNPs that you can check for. It's related to folate metabolism and methylation. Now, you want to be careful because sometimes there's companies that only check a few SNPs and they charge $600 or many hundreds of dollars for just looking at a few SNPs. Whereas you could get another service like Self Decode, that's my company, of course, in which you get not only MTHFR, but you also get 100 other million SNPs plus very advanced polygenic risk scoring and very advanced recommendations database and system. So I would highly encourage you to not fall for these some semi scams, I would call them, because they're not full scams because they are providing value if you get MTHFR, and I think it could be significant value, right? It's equivalent to a test, and people pay hundreds of dollars for tests, but you can get way more value by getting something like Self Decode. So that's just a caveat there. And when it comes to these genetics companies on the market, to date, the ones doing health and giving recommendations, I would consider them very not up to par. That's my word of caution. Self Decode is the only one that I would consider very advanced.